Okay, welcome to this hour's seminar. This hour is brought to you by the Predicta Project LLC and Mark Gustavson. Our presenters are Mark Gustavson, Lynn Koberna, Steve Rollier, and Bob Wick. If I may take a moment, I think there are certain times in our lives when there's a window of opportunity where things affect us more greatly than they would when that window is closed. Most often, it seems to be those windows are more open when we're younger. We tend to experience something like, if you can remember the first time you saw your first hot rod, and how that affected you. And there's something that sticks with you for the rest of your life. I think this is also the case for our next seminar, that, you know, when Mark first saw the Predicta car, those flowing curves, beautiful paint job, the clear bubble top, for some reason it stuck with him. And so with that, I would like to present to you the Predicta project, Mark's undocumented mental project. So with that said, let's continue on.
Well, you.
Yeah, the first section is you.
I don't know whose cups those are. What's your question?
Let's see if I can manage the tech here. Welcome to all of you.
Microphone, please.
Which mic?
Oh, yes.
The tape in this thing.
Make sure you hold it close to your mouth.
Thank you for coming here. I hate these things. So, I know, Dave, I know. I'm trying to repent. This is an obsession of mine. I remember when I was in the fourth grade, my mother would send me down to the local grocery store, a little IGA, and they would have car magazines there, and there was a picture of this car on the cover of Carcraft magazine, and I was mesmerized by it. I was 9 years old, completely mesmerized. And so I bought the magazine with spare coinage left over from the purchase. My mother took it home and dog-eared the thing in about 3 days. And went out and bought other copies, and it's become a session with it ever since. I can't explain it. It's an aberration for sure. Some psychologists would probably have much to say about it. And I don't particularly care what they say. But it has been a real passion of mine since that point. Through junior high school, of course, the kit came out in early '64. It was issued in mid-July of '64. My interest in washing cars and cutting lawns suddenly increased, so I could spend a little money buying kits, and I butchered and ruined them all. In college, I built one, and it just, the whole imagery, the whole preoccupation with this car has some strange connection to me. About that time, I thought I wanted to write a book on the car, so I took the step of writing Daryl Starbird. He and his wife Donna, the most gracious people that have ever walked on earth, responded very, very openly and shared photographs and images with me. And that was probably about 1978. Not long after that, as I would gather hot rod shows and buy magazines and so forth, do research, I would buy more ephemera, more documents, more magazines, more photographs. And in about 1989, I become pretty good acquaintance with Roger Harney, who was the kit manager for Monogram. He and I became pretty good friends, and he knew of my obsession. And so he gave me all the photographs, including negatives, the photo boards and all the paste ups that Monogram had of the car when they took it in late 1962 to measure it for the kit. He gave the whole thing to me. Envelopes, photographs. It's an astonishing collection of items. He also gave to me all of the engineering drawings that they used internally to produce the dies, all done on sepia, and they're in remarkable condition. To preserve them, I consulted with someone at a library to see how one preserves these things, and I got the materials to do so, and took all these drawings down. I think about that time, Bob Wick and I became acquainted, and Bob said you ought to have them blueprinted or the equivalent, so I ran them down and had them all blueprinted, so I didn't have to touch the originals. I was worried about, finger damage to them and so forth. And the thing just went on and on and on. I became more and more obsessional about it, and pretty soon the book idea grew and metastasized, I might say. It just went on and on and on. And so I started to gather photographs. I now have a more complete collection of photographs of anyone on earth, including Daryl Starbird. I pointed out things to him about his car that he didn't know or had forgotten. The car was built in an 11-week sequence in late 1959 so he could attend the Oakland Roadster Show where he won the Car of the Future award. He built it on a shoestring budget from a badly wrecked 56 Thunderbird that he traded for a 312 Ford V8. He got this beat up Thunderbird, went down and bought panels for it, restyled the car. In the book that's coming out, we show all the different versions of the car as he was hammer welding it. And it was an astonishing kind of development. Okay. When the car was finished, he towed the car across country behind his custom 60 Buick Riviera in the midst of a snowstorm. He got trapped in Albuquerque, New Mexico in a snowstorm, and the car was caught in the snowstorm and flipped off the road. The tow vehicle and the car and the trailer flipped off the road. There was no bubble top on it at the time, it was just covered up with the tarp. The bubble top was still being finished at Acri Plastics in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And a trucker came along and pulled the whole rig out of the juice, and he had to replace some parts in the rear axle because it had torn in the Coral Springs exclusively. But he soldiered on to California, cleaned the car up, and it was initially placed in the Oakland Roadster Show without the bubble top because it wasn't done. That was delivered 2 days later. Bill Cushenberry, an old employee of his, was nice enough to help him mount the bubble top following the show, and then it showed up. This is the Harry Bagdasarian show in March of 1960. Seen outside, you can see this shot is a little distorted. We've had to, with Steve Rollier's great help, we've had to rescue a number of pretty poor quality original photographs. This is distorted somehow. The bubble's way taller than it really was, and the angle's too far downward. But the car was painted in a 1956 Plymouth factory color. It was just a metallic blue with white interior and copper highlights on the inside. It was a little bizarre. And here in Motor Life magazine, he won Car of the Year award. He's 26 years old here. He built it when he was 25. Put the car together. This is in his favorite parts. Steve Rollier rescued. This photograph is badly faded. Steve, using an Adobe Photoshop program, cleaned it up, put color back in the grass and back in the trees. And that star was standing next to it with the Car of the Year award. You notice the taillights are all made out of 59 Cadillacs. There are 3 red ones on the corner and the rest were painted white. How he afforded so many Cadillac taillights, we'll never know. The car was taken back the car was driven for a number of years. This is going to be very quick. The car was driven for a number of years. He put a lot of street miles on it. Once he was trapped at he pulled into like a burger joint at night, and the original shifters between the console broke. It's just a little spindly shaft. But he sat there, he said, very cool, and he was 27 years old, not letting anyone it broke. And until everyone else left, and his buddy came over with a big floor jack, jacked it up, and they welded it back on the shifter. This thing has tiller shifting. It's a rather, as Bob's illustrations will show later, it's a rather unique combination of 58 Chrysler and 56 Ford Thunderbird steering boxes hooked together in tandem to steer the front wheels. But he was that very cool. He ran out of gas one day in the freeway. People called in to the hyper patrol saying a flying saucer had landed. He had to go back and get someone to bring him gas. The car was driven for about 30,000 miles and it got beat to heck. He went on to build other cars that forecasted the Futurista. They were taller during this period of time. Let's not go too far for that one yet. So he restyled the car. He pulled it back into the shop after Monogram measured it. I've got all those measurement photographs, about 73 of them, where they run tape. There was no 3D scanning. They run a piece of 3-inch masking tape, 2.5-inch masking tape over the top of the shape and then try to interpret the shape. That's the reason the kit is so badly off. It's not even close. But they would do this. And of course, at that point, the rear wheel wells, look here. See how the rear wheels are flattened at the top? You flared them, cleaned up the back end and the front end, same bubble, rolled the front and rear pans, added look at the bottom of the rocker panel, he added a piece of 3/4-inch steel tubing at the bottom of the rocker panel because he didn't like how it curved under, he wanted to give it some shape back there. So at that point, Monogram took it, he delivered it back to them in this condition,
Mark,
And,
hold it in your mouth.
sorry, he delivered it back to Monogram, and they used it for a number of years in various displays. As the book will detail in chapter 6, they literally didn't promote the car very well, because at about the time this car was done, they had already purchased 2 other Starboard cars, and the whole custom car market collapsed. And they found themselves with custom cars sitting in the inventory in their warehouse that they really didn't know much to do about. So the car was used and abused, and we have photographs of it being driven to the Chicago Auto Show in 1966. Apparently it was driven from the Monogram plant to the not Cobo Hall, because that's in Detroit, but to the Chicago Auto Show pavilion. On dirty roads with snow, it's got caked ice and crud all over it, dirty, it's just filthy. And they took a dry rag and wiped the car down. It's just astonishing. And after that, they advertised the car in 1968 in, I think the September 1968 issue of Carcraft, along with the little coffin. They advertised them both for sale. They never told, Monogram never told Starboard that the Predicta was for sale. Starboard learned that the little coffin was for sale, in which he had some smaller role. He bought that car, but he never knew the Predicta was for sale. The Predicta was eventually given away. I'm jumping years here. In 1970, through a contest in Model Cars magazine, Model Car Science. You had to build a dream dragster, and the winner got the Predicta. So they just, and of course the guy that won it was Darryl Zip, Zipper Motors. Darryl Zip was the product manager for Revell. He wins the car. He advises them back there. He calls one day and said, "Why haven't I received my car?" He talked to Bob Reeder at Monogram. Bob Reeder was kind of curt with him on the phone, said, "Oh, it's you," and said, "We'll have the car delivered." They were going to bring it back originally in transported to California to the winter in an enclosed trailer towed by a suitable pickup truck or a transport truck or something. They lashed it onto the back of a truck, hooked it up to a 67 Toronado and drove it across country. It picked up bugs on the way. They threw a chain over the back axle to secure it to the trailer. In the process of doing that, they crushed the rear axle brake line. So he gets in the car on its delivery, fires it up, has no neutral safety switch at the time. It fires up, it jumps off the trailer, flies backward, almost kills his wife and his infant daughter, almost takes out a neighbor's wife and her infant daughter, ends up in a hedgerow. And so the car was not badly damaged. They touched it up, but it had been painted. They discovered they needed to paint it before they tried to sell it. And so at that point, Darryl Zip showed it for a couple of years and then sold it to American Chopper. The motorcycle people, well, they were not particularly pleasant to the car, and they cut a hole in the hood, put a blower on it, and painted it this way. They put modern mags on it, beautiful reverse rims. And this is the way Starboard showed it for a couple of years, with signs saying, "Look what they did to my car." and they just butchered. And in the process of doing that, it was hit hard on the right rear quarter panel. And I mean hard. The passenger rear quarter panel was 3 inches shorter than the left. And they just, whoever repaired it in California just slathered it with Bondo and tried to get it back together. The door didn't fit flush, and so it was a terrible mess. So he took it back into the shop, cleaned up as best he could, turned it into kind of a street machine, Darryl did, and showed it at one of his shows in the upper Midwest. You can see back here's one of those vans he did, and there's some other Starboard cars here in the background. But this is from about 1979. He found the car. He used to own the Rollier show, so he, with Harry Bagdasarian, they were driving down the road one day, wherever, I think in Koberna, and they saw the car Predicta sitting outside the shop of American Chopper. Darryl said he almost crashed through the barrel pit, drove his truck through there, went and bought it on the spot, and put it on a trailer, and he towed it back to the shop. And that's when he did this to it, cleaned it up. But the car he had to hammer a fresh lip area in the hood. He filled in the hole, but it was a quick job because he had to put it on display, and he couldn't find the new hood because this one's been heavily modified. So then he redid the car again. But then the car sat there. You notice this doesn't have, I don't think this is the bubble top splitter. He took that off. Blue fresh bubble, it's the original cracked. And the car sat this way for a while. Then he opened his Rock Custom Hall of Fame museum back there and sent it down the road to Carl Green, who restored the Rock Custom Dream Truck after it was nearly destroyed. He brought it back, put it on display, at his show, and then restored it final time in 2008. He tore it to the ground. I mean, went right to the ground. He had never torn it down before. He left the frame in place, welded the frame to the body. Did all sorts of filler panels to make it look show-worthy underneath. Re-chromed everything, rebuilt the Hemi, redid the interior, painted it a better blue, a much lighter pearl blue than this. And that's where the car sits today in his Rob Custom Hall of Fame. So that's compressing, 45 years into 5-6 minutes. So that's sort of the history of this. These photographs are a little distorted, of course. But
That's the angle you're seeing them at too.
well, and I'm seeing it from that angle too. But you'll notice here that this has a strong downward character here. As we will show later in the chart that Steve has, they misinterpreted almost every measurement on this car. So that the kit you see down here, which is taken from a 1964 issue down here in front of Jim Fernandez's mock-up, it's just terrible. So at this point, I'm going to turn the time to Bob Wick. We needed to understand, because we're going to build models of this, we needed to understand how the thing worked mechanically. These are days before computer chips and before sophisticated equipment. In fact, there was no equipment. He built this all in his original shop, replicated here, was a converted chicken coop. They had poured concrete on the inside and cleaned it up a little bit. That's where he built this car and 4 of his other famous cars. So at that point, this was 6 or 7 years ago, Bob, I decided that it was probably a pretty good idea for us to have some illustrations. So I contacted a friend of mine, now deceased, Mike Smith, who was a lifelong mechanic and hot rod builder, and he sort of sketched the stuff in. And then I turned it over to Bob, and he then did the mechanical illustrations. And Bob, I turned it over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to do this. I think it's going to be easier if I just move forward here. All right, Mark had mentioned the steering gear that was put together. Now I'm going to preface all of this stuff. Basically, I worked for, and if you read the introduction to this appendices in the book, I thought there was going to be this huge volume of material that I could refer to. It would be a really easy job. Not really the case. A lot of stuff didn't exist that we assumed did or would exist. A lot of stuff was changed during the construction of the car, and I didn't always know where that, in many cases, the photographs, what period of time they were taken in. It was tough to know what was done when and where and how and what was used. But we had Daryl and Mark and Mike Smith and anybody else that we could find that had worked on it or been familiar with it. And through that process, we just put together the best information that we could. And rather than doing three-dimensional colored renderings, what we decided to do was simply line drawings, essentially mechanical presentations or representations to show how things went together. And as we go through this series, you'll see how all of this works. But this was how the steering converted motion with the stick on the console to right and left turning. So the back one, just gonna,
Turn it around. There you go.
oh, okay. And let's back it up. Well, that is my skill with computers. If I want to take it backwards, what, back this? Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay.
Where's the
Oops.
full screen?
This is not doing what I want it to here.
Bob will not take Dave suggested.
Oh, okay. All right. Clearly, there is a reason I did all these drawings by hand and not with the computer. All right, there we go. So back it up to, okay. So at the the big part, which is a Chrysler power steering unit from 58 Chrysler, coupled with a short coupling to the Thunderbird's original steering box, and by using those two together, that's how it converted forward motion to rotating motion. And then he built a arm that came off of the Chrysler unit down, and that ran to the drag length that then ran the steering. And you'll see that on the next one, I believe. Okay, so that's a three-dimensional view of how all of this went together. Again, what we looked at doing was simply line art, assembly or exploded views, or a drawing of a particular element. And then as you go through these, you will see how they go together. So again, the lever that he steered with, the 56 T-Bird steering box, the Chrysler steering box, the arm, the drag link going forward, and if you follow the dotted lines that show how things went together, the bottom corner there is a rotating or pivoting plate that was mounted to the chassis, and that was how it converted through the tie rod and all of the steering stuff that went up to the right and left front wheels. The bracket, I'm going to get this to work. It's not going. Okay, well, all right. There we go. The front cross member is up there, so it gives you a relative position of all of these elements. Okay. All right, so this is a top view, as though you were looking down on it. Again, you can see the relative positions of the steering boxes, the drag link going forward, how all of that was attached and then steered the wheels. Now, to make this drivable from both sides, you could drive it from either the driver's side or the passenger side. He had to come up with a way to get a gas pedal and a brake pedal in their respective positions on both sides. So what he did was to take the assembly that would be used on the driver's side, run a pair of rods through bushings, through the center console, down to the other side, and then off of those ran, in the case of the element on the right, which is the master cylinder, that actuated the master cylinder, and the one in the center activated the carburetor linkage. Wait a minute. What are you doing?
Do you want me to click it for you?
Yeah, why don't you do that if you would? So we did that.
That's the way they are in the
Oh,
presentation. That's
Okay,
how-
all right, so this is the carburetor linkage from the left side. That was coming off of that rod with the rod coming through the firewall. And this is how he developed and designed the linkage to operate all four of the carburetors. There's a carburetor over here. But basically, he built manifolds and all of the assemblies and put it together so that everything was actuated by the gas pedal. Huh? Okay, go ahead.
That's what the carburetors look like, 60 Falcon glass bowl carburetors on the monogram version of the car.
What? I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
60 Falcon glass bowl carburetors. He mounted 4 of them on the Hemi in the monogram version.
Again, the steering gear, the bracketry at the front. It's been a while since I've done these. I'm not quite sure, because I don't remember what the captions were that I wrote for each one. Go into the next one, let's see what we've got there. Oh, is that the end of it? Okay. Anyway, so again, what we ended up doing was all of this stuff, drawings done by hand, to the best of what we could cull from all of the reference materials that we found. And as you look at it, especially sitting down and looking at it in front of you, it becomes easier to follow how all of this stuff worked. That's how the steering and the basic chassis was set up.
The book will, in one of the appendices, contains all 15 or 16 of Bob's illustrations. They're really terrific. Bob and Daryl would go back and forth, dozens of times. Start with critique, write notes, Bob would revise and send back. It was quite a process. Now we're going to talk about one of the goals we have here is how to build a model, an accurate model, because as you see, the model where it is in the room here, it is not accurate. It's not even close. So at this point, Lynn Koberna got involved, and Lynn, I turn this over to you at this point.
Should be on.
Are you good with the clicker?
Okay, so I had a really unique experience in that I actually got to fly to the National Rod and Custom Hall of Fame in Afton, Oklahoma, which is the home of the Predicta, and got to meet Daryl Starbird and his lovely wife, Donna. They were really hospitable. I mean, that was a real treat. And when I walked into the museum, so let me show you the, so this is the driveway to the museum. It's quite spectacular. It's around a very gorgeous lake resort community, and I can see why they located there. And here's a it's about 3/4 size hand-painted Predicta on the side of the exterior wall of the Hall of Fame. When I got inside, Daryl greeted me and Donna greeted me, and they insisted that I take a tour of the Hall of Fame. And I had a very limited window of time to capture the measurements for this, and so I wanted to honor their graciousness, and so I took this fantastic tour of the history of hot rodding and customizing, and it was just delightful to get a tour. And they don't do that for most of the people who attend the Hall of Fame. So I was really honored. And then I went crazy with Daryl trying to get this thing recorded and documented. So one of the criteria I had for measuring the Predicta was that it had to be safe for the finish and it had to be fast. So the first thing I did when I landed in Tulsa was to go to Home Depot and buy 2 wood yardsticks. And I used a 35-foot contractor's tape measure. You can see on the end here, I taped it with red electrical tape, so if I ever touched the finish, the tape would protect the vehicle. And same with the yardsticks. So what I did is I laid out the tape measure from the rear of the vehicle, which was a flat surface, to the front of the vehicle. I stretched out the whole, I think it's 118 inches, the total length. And then I used the yardstick and used it like a plumb vertically to mark off the measurements. And I used the carpenter adage, measure twice, mark once. So this Mark provided me with a handful of sketches, and that he marked on what he wanted me to mark up, and I had to rush through this to get all this done. I had about 3 hours to capture the details of the. So these are a few of his markups and my notations. Very crude, very fast. And this is what we did to capture everything. And then when I got a place where I had some time, I took these crude drawings and did some overall views of the Predicta, and I created this in 2 sections, so you can see that I started the zero point at the rear of the Predicta, and then these are the cumulative measurements from rear to front, and then the space between the back of the bubble, the front of the bubble, and the nose. And these are the horizontal upper dimensions. And then I created lower dimensions, same logic. The 0 point from the rear and cumulative all the way. I did cumulative rather than additive dimensions because you get less error. There's no cumulative error. And then I did the same thing with the vertical dimensions and created everything from ground level and then measured vertically using the high-tech yardstick. And here's a picture of Daryl. He really got on his hands and knees for me. I really appreciate that. He had to connect the battery to the activator for opening up the bubble top. So he did that. Here's a couple of details that I took from the aerial on top of the bubble, the TV and the interior, the engine, and
That's the last one.
oh, you don't have the picture of Daryl and Donna? Okay, so there was one picture I got of Daryl and his wife Donna and me holding up our yardsticks in front of the Predicta, and that whole experience was just surreal. I mean, seeing that iconic vehicle in real person just took my breath away. So it was a real treat for me to actually dimension it so that we can get an accurate scale model.
Not sure how that got left off, Lynn, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Lynn. Then we turned Lynn's measurements to Steve Rollier using the Photoshop programming, and I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
And he did magic. Let me tell you, this is magic.
Thank you. So yeah, I took Lynn's really nice drawings and his measurements, and that is sensitive. So we have these really great three great pictures because it's a really dead profile and a really straight on back shot and a straight on front shot. And then I started putting Lynn's measurements on them. Here's like the lower horizontal. I'm gonna run through these quick because we're running short on time, and you don't have to worry about every single measurement. Some details, upper horizontal detail in the back because it's so tiny it wouldn't fit on the big one. These are the vertical ones, and as Lynn said, the ground clearance is a really dead 5 inches all the way across. So I subtracted 5 inches from all those measurements from the ground to get the body measurements. A little detail in the back, vertical. Here's the front dimensions and the rear dimensions. And then this 3/4 one with all the dimensions on it. And okay, so then we translated all those measurements to 1/24 scale measurements. So these are all the same dimensions, just divided by 24. So same thing, just reduced to what it would be in 1/24 scale. Okay, so then I said, let's talk to Mark. I said, can you take some good pictures of a nice build model, profile, front and rear? Got those. And then we got, now these are measurements from the model kit itself. Obviously they're going to be a lot different from what the rear car is. And you can see right away how different it looks. There's the upper horizontal, lower horizontal, the details. These pretty much match the measurements we took off the real car. In, you know, the measurements that they are, not the not the measurements as they exist. Okay, so then we got this comparative section where you can start to see the discrepancies between the 1/24 scale measurements and kit measurements. Again, the kit measurements in green and the correct dimensions in red. Same thing. Yeah, you can see the front overhang especially is just really way off. The upper horizontal, the vertical dimensions, the detail of the back, the front dimensions, rear. And here's a chart that Mark started putting together. of the discrepancies. It's not complete, but it's just kind of gives you an idea of where we're kind of going with all this. And then finally, you know, the more I looked at these drawings, I started thinking, well, I started to see just with the naked eye what was really wrong with this kit. One thing that really started to stand out for me was the bubble top itself. Not only the size of it, but also the shape of it. So here's the bubble from the profile drawing we saw earlier. Here's the kit bubble that is a photograph that I took of just a mocked up kit. And then I thought, okay, I'll scale these things both to 1/24 scale and overlay them. So what I did, in the next slide, you'll see the kit bubble is represented in red, and the actual Predicta bubble is represented in black and white. And then here's what happened. So that, to me, was a pretty good dramatic manifestation of a really basic inaccuracy in the kit that needs to be fixed. Okay, that's my bit. So back to Mark, right? Next is the carburetor.
Next is 3D printing.
Well, 3D printing.
Yeah, well, it's just a carburetor. Yeah.
Well, when I saw the photograph of the car, when I saw the photograph of the engine of the car, in the monogram era, when Starboard delivered the car back to monogram, they popped the hood, took the air cleaner off to show how it was done. They wanted, Roger Harney wanted to see it, so forth. I discovered there were 4 of these carburetors mounted on a custom-made intake on a Chrysler Hemi. I didn't quite know what I was looking at, so I sent a picture to Steve Rollier and to Mike Smith. Mike identified it as a 60 Falcon. There's something unique about it. It's real glass. It's not plastic. And so I got on eBay with Steve's help. I got some really great images. He is the research king on earth, by the way. And I took these photographs and compared them to some eBay auctions and found this carburetor, which was complete. Dirty as can be, but it was complete, and taken off a guy who was partying out of Falcon. He found the junkyard. So I bought it for like $20. It cost me $30 to have it shipped. And took it down to a place where they repair cars, brake place. And they cleaned it off with solvent, and here's that carburetor. I mean, it's literally the one that this is represented, will be scanned. I'll turn this down, Lynn, because now I'm really out of my menu. But this, we have done, Lynn's friends have done some preliminary scans of this to see what can be done at 24 scale. And it's remarkable to see this technology. So then let me turn that to you for a moment.
So, what I did was I took the original carburetor to a friend of mine, and he referred me to a CAD operator who created the CAD files in SolidWorks. And then we scaled those to 1/24th scale and I think 1/16th. And then my friend 3D printed them. He has a SLA printer in his home. And wait, back up. That's the CAD file. Original CAD file. Boy, these are sensitive. Okay, do we have the actual models of the printed version?
No.
Okay, and we don't have them here. Okay.
You couldn't see them.
Okay, they're like this.
Yeah.
Okay, but they came out pretty good. They had a lot of what they call post-processing, which means you have to, like you get an injection molded kit has trees, sprue, and 3D printing is no different. You have to have support to print these. So we had to clean them all up to get the pieces shaped properly. But the basics were all there in scale. And you can do that with 3D printing.
Thank you for your help with that. Lynn's really been, has a leadership position in this. And we intend, of course, that these files will be further developed and so forth. Let me have them.
Oh, sorry.
Let's see if I can manipulate this. Okay, Bob Brick relied upon this. This is a photograph of the Predicta being constructed, bearing Starbird's notes. This shows you some of the mechanical problems we have faced in mechanical illustrations, and the ones that we faced when the model was built. This, of course, he mocked the entire car up with the body off it before he put the body back, Bruce out body back on it. But that's This was backyard engineering if there ever was anything. You can see the Chrysler steering.
Well, okay, that was what I was gonna say, it was
Okay.
as a reference.
Yes,
The bottom, the very bottom is
Bottom.
the arm that came off of the Chrysler. The very bottom.
The very bottom is the arm that comes off of the Chrysler unit. Chrysler unit runs parallel to the frame, goes back to the Thunderbird unit, and then over to the stick for steering. So that gives you a reference of where this was. And this is not atypical of the photographs that I worked from to develop those drawings.
you'll notice also that to lower the car, he took the outriggers and reversed them. Rather than cut coils or doing silly things like putting spacers in the rear lift springs, he flipped the mounters around so the body dropped over the frame and then built a new floor. It was quite inventive, actually. That's a picture Steve Rollier found of a nicely restored, very clean original Chrysler steering setup. Now you can see what the upper and lower control arms look like on the 56 Thunderbird. We're gonna have to make those. The kit things are appalling. I don't care if it's a monogram or the AMT kit, they're just awful. Now here's a picture Steve dug up of a Chrysler Hemi from that era. Now we're not gonna use those air cleaners and so forth, but those are some of the references we're using. And of course this. Now Starboard took the generator, you can see right here, and mounted it low over on the side because it wouldn't clear the hood. And in the process of doing that, the bracket was there was so much tension on that it pulled, in the first version of the car, it pulled the generator downward so that it didn't spin enough. He later extended the lower pulley with a long shaft and ran a device that, you know, what do you call it, where we run the belt?
Tensioner?
A tensioner on the bottom to straighten, give tension back in to keep the generator square because it wasn't generating power. When he restored the car in 2007, he converted the whole thing to one wire alternator, so that problem went away. Now we're into the next section here where we're going to do scale models of this. One of my goals is to do an authentic model of it in two scales. First 24th scale and then in 16th. The reason I chose the 16th is the bubble has to be vac formed, and there's no material in my research that will produce an optically clear vacuum formed bubble in a size larger than 16 scale. We could spend a heck of a lot of money and go have some dies made or something to do real glass, but like with the real car, the chopper windshield, the first one's $17,000 and the second windshield's 5 cents. It's something like that because you've got to make those, and there are companies that will do it, but the cost is just out there, Pluto. So I've got to vacuum form it. So I bought a vacuum form machine that'll handle large enough. But in researching the various clear materials like styrene, perspex, and everything else, the manufacturers say that you can't get an optically pure, that is a non-reflective, non-distorting image through anything larger than the footprint of what an accurate 16 scale bubble is. So the model's got to be 16 scale. Now, I'm going to turn some time over briefly to Jim Fernandez. One of the goals of this project is to build a diorama of the original shop where the car was constructed at the same time the Percasta and the Futurista and the Orange Hauler. So, Jim, I'm going to leave it up to you.
Hello. Okay, well, you know, we've been modeling in plastic for years, and then we kind of moved on to brass. A lot of really talented people do working in brass. Now we've got 3D printing. Well, the next thing we're going to start doing is cardboard. I talked to Mark, and he says, yeah, the last GSL is going to be cardboard models only.
Cardboard is the future.
Well, it so happens that cardboard is a diorama builder's friend, because you can start out something in cardboard, build it really quickly, and be able to figure out what you want to do with it. So what I did was 2 years ago, Daryl Starboard was going to be at the GSL, and I wanted to build something so we could talk with him. So I drew some drawings of the garage, This is the garage, and this is really the only outside picture we have of the garage. It's not a very good picture, but this is all I had to start with. So you can kind of pass that around if you want. Anyway, I didn't have much to go with. And so one of the things I did was I made some drawings up and sent them to Daryl. I used my high school drafting talents and came up with some drawings of the garage, and then I had to figure out what the dimensions were going to be. That's the hard part. The picture I had kind of gave me an idea what it looked like, but I had to figure out what the dimensions are. And you know, you just heard all these guys doing this research. Well, that's what I had to do. And so one of the things I did was I went to Google, and guess what? Put in the address in Kansas of the Starbird garage, and it's still there. And the Google car driving around taking pictures of it. And this is only one view of it. I got a bunch of views. And so I had to start counting blocks. It was made out of an 8 by 16 inch concrete block. And I had to count from the pictures on the computer how many blocks high and how many blocks made up at the top of the opening, and so I had to do all that stuff. And I kept looking at thousands of pictures and sending the information to Daryl. And then when Daryl came to the last GSL, I had made this mock-up out of cardboard. Just to tell you though, what I did, I started out with 1/48 scale, just to kind of see what I wanted to do with it, whether I wanted to cut the roof off or whatever. Anyway, I ended up with this. This is the 1/24 scale mock-up in cardboard of the garage and what it's going to look like when you build it in with regular plastic or whatever we use. So I put a little furniture in there. But there's some things that don't have pictures, like the inside of the office. He never took a picture of the inside of his office. So we have to create that. There was some graphics that were taken of the inside. There were pictures of the inside, and so I recreated some of the things on the walls to show what that's going to look like. And he knew where the bathroom was, so he didn't even remember where the layout of the bathroom was. When I asked Daryl, I said, "Well, where is the toilet?" He said, "I don't remember." So we have to kind of create that. But at any rate, this is a mock-up of the diorama for the garage, made in cardboard. So we know how big it is, and now we know what we're going to do with it. But the Google search really helped me a lot, because it could give me the size that way of all the bricks and where they laid out. So, any questions? Okay.
At this point, part of what we're going to do now with this project is to we're going to now expand the project. I mean, the scope of this is nothing if not ambitious. But what I want to do is, let me tell you about a conversation very briefly, because I know, I get it. When I was talking to Roger Harney the time he donated all that stuff to me, he told me that Monogram initially intended to build a halo kit to make the Predicta into a halo kit. The sort that Johan did with this turbine car. If any of you have ever seen that kit, it's probably the best 24 they've ever done. But then Chrysler funded about $250,000 worth of money that helped it. And Monogram decided they didn't want to do that. They had all the research there, and they had the car. They took plenty of photographs. Starboard took plenty of photographs of the car when it was being restocked in the shop. But they decided not to do it, and Roger told me they always wanted to do it. That except for the decisions of the corporate president and CEO, Harney would have done the project. So we've decided that we're going to do it. And so what we're, in this whole process, we're going to create a halo kit of what the car could have, what the model could have been like: opening doors, properly dimensioned bubble top, authentically working suspension as the turbine car kit did, and all the rest, and then recreate the Monogram custom car lot. When eBay first came online, I was fortunate enough to buy a bunch of Predicta Monogram stuff from an old hobby store in the Midwest, where you could still buy stuff on eBay before it turned into whatever's doing these days. And I bought these images, and I found an entire custom car lot package that Monogram used to send out to dealers, to their hobby stores. And it includes all the ribbons, and includes all the stuff. It's a complete kit. I paid, even in those days, way too much money for it. But we're going to now, with some of these things, we're gonna go back and recreate some of these images, take out some of this stuff and put the Predicta into there digitally. Here's the ad looks like up close. Starboard, you notice right here, was on board at this point. He did this really cool booklet from cars to customizing. Then this is the display box that Monogram sent out to its various hobby stores. When the hobby store ordered just a case, they would send out a build-up model and they send out this display. Now, this is one of the rare Pearl models, and they never sent a Pearl one out because of all the production problems with it. But we've sort of recreated this. Steve Rollier went in and cleaned up the bottom of the box, and we donated this to NNLEASE, and they raised about $450 for the museum by way of Steve's work in mind. And Paul Brinkhurst also cleaned up one of the Pearl Essence versions I bought of Monogram a long time ago. Now, so at that point, we started to take seriously what it would be like to do a Halo kit. So I talked to Bob. Bob sketched out, using as inspiration the original, using the original artwork from the '64 kit. Bob reimagined what this would look like. And then we decided what kind of features would be used. From my notes talking to Roger Harney, as confirmed by Bob Reeder. And at that point, I went to Brad Leisure, and the famed illustrator, and I said, will you please recreate or create what this box would be like? And here's the box. Here's the mock-up box, actually. Based on that artwork up there, that's about the third or fourth generation of it. But Leisure mocked this thing up. Then I called Daryl Starboard and I said, I want to license the kit from you. Remember, the original licensing with Monogram expired in 1968, I believe. When the kit was issued in New Zealand, the original agreement with Starboard expired. And so I now have the rights to reproduce the kit, which we're gonna do with resin, after the 3D scanning and all the rest. So we'll be using some version of that box, and we're gonna do resin. I've talked to Norm Weber, he's gonna resin cast all the bits and pieces, and we're gonna have machine parts and all this crazy, insane stuff. So we're gonna do this, but then we're gonna do one other thing, just to confirm that we're all out of our minds. At this time, Monogram is also producing the big scale cars, the 8 scale, the big Deuce, big Rod, big T and so forth. So I said, Bob, imagine what it would be like to do a big Predicta. So Bob sketched it out, and I said, Bob, please now put some color to it. That's what the box is going to look like. All drawn from imagery and inspiration from the Monogram big kits of that era. This is all Bob's work. Now, with being 16 scale, for reasons we've discussed, I just can't find the material to make a bigger bubble. It just isn't available without doing a glass roof, for heaven's sakes. And that is way outside anyone's budget. But eventually, we're going to do this in a 16 scale. I have a license for this too. This will be a very limited production kit, and it'll be expensive. So that's kind of where the project is these days. And then one of the things we're going to do with this reimagined kit is that we're going to postulate that Ford Motor Company, when they did the custom car caravan in 1963 through 66, contacted Daryl Starboard and said, would you allow us to use your Predicta, use the Predicta car in the custom car caravan? Here's an image of the custom car caravan from 63. That's the famed Thunderbird Italienne. We're going to recreate this image showing the Predicta there. There are other details about some restyling and things we're going to do with it, but this gives you a sense about what the rest of that project will be like. Then I went to Bob and I said, Bob, now look, what happens 100 years from now? What happens to the car 100 years from now? I said, Bob, imagine this. I'm not so good with imagination. So Bob said, well, hell, some futuristic guys are driving along the road and they find the car crashed at the bottom of a mountain or a small hill. So Bob sketched this thing up probably 10 years ago. And it's funny in some ways, but it suggests what the ultimate, maybe some future auto historians find the car and restore it. I mean, who knows? This is the past, present, and future of the Predicta, and that shows you how obsessional we all are. And I think we all need like some lithium or something. We're done here with our presentation. Please, questions you may have, comments?
What would you say the 24 scale one will cost?
No idea.
No idea?
No idea.
$80, 130, 500?
It'll be $500 to $800.